Hello, my ruthless architects of aftermath. Welcome to the ruins, your ruins, that you didn't walk away from. You reconstructed them with a single act so unholy, it didn't just break the game. It burned its rule book, spat in the ashes, and walked away barefoot. No one expected you. That's the curse of excellence that doesn't compete. It erases. What you did, it wasn't a move. It was a war crime against mediocrity. Let's make this very clear. You weren't here to play their game. You showed up with gasoline, not gloves. You weren't looking for fair play. You wanted exposure. Exposure of how fragile their throne was. One flick of your wrist, one twist of your intention, and the entire board snapped in half, like it was always made of rotting wood pretending to be oak. You didn't outshine anyone. You rewired what it means to perform. You didn't win. You uncreated the concept of opposition. The world was watching, but they didn't realize they weren't witnessing a moment. They were watching a legacy forming in real time. A catastrophe orchestrated in silence, then detonated in precision. Every blink from the audience was a freeze frame of disbelief. See, they thought they'd see another performance. Instead, they saw purification, a ritual, the cleansing of everything unworthy. Because you didn't just show skill, you demonstrated intent. There's a difference between those who play to win and those who play to rewrite the meaning of domination. You belong to the latter, the kind who doesn't raise their voice but makes the entire room whisper, the kind who doesn't walk in with presence. You become the silence after the impact. What separates your act from the rest is not speed, not grace, not even precision. It's the absence of hesitation, the cold, elegant slaughter of doubt. You didn't hesitate, you executed. And execution, when laced with that level of confidence, doesn't echo. It scars. They built walls. You walked through them. They drew lines. You erased them. They prepared for strategy. You arrived as prophecy. There's no blueprint to what you did, because blueprints are for buildings. What you did was tectonic, a shift. You weren't here to level the field. You were here to make sure there was no field left to measure. And while they were still trying to understand the rules, you became the conclusion. That's the thing. You never fight to be seen. You vanish into the act so completely, they can't separate you from the consequence. The aftershock is your autograph. Do you feel it? The silence after the noise. That's not peace. That's aftermath. That's the sound of minds trying to catch up to what you just did. They'll watch the replay 100 times, and they'll still miss the moment where you decided. Because decisions like that don't happen with logic. They erupt from something deeper, something primitive, something violent. Some call it instinct. Others call it madness. But it's neither. It's clarity. Cold, brutal, spiritual clarity. The kind that comes when you're no longer seeking permission to destroy. You're simply asking, what took me so long? Understand this. Your silence before the move. That wasn't hesitation. That was calculation. A sacred pause before the exorcism. The world mistook it for doubt, but only because they've never seen precision born from pressure. They don't know what it looks like when someone doesn't crumble under weight, but uses it to aim better. You didn't just change the pace. You killed the rhythm no one could follow because you weren't playing their song. You were conducting an orchestra of collapse. Every step forward was a step over someone's idea of how it's supposed to go. But you weren't here for tradition. You were here for rupture. And rupture you gave them. They tried to copy. They tried to understand. But the truth is, you can't mimic destruction like this. Because it isn't style, it's state. It's not posture. It's possession. Something had taken over. Not a demon, not a god. Something worse. Intention, fully realized. The version of you they were never prepared to see. This wasn't about flash. There was no glitter, no drum roll. It was all edge, no embellishment. The kind of move that doesn't trend. It haunts. The kind of execution that doesn't invite applause. It silences rooms and changes minds. You walked in with no banner, no signal, just presence. And when presence becomes impact, everything soft dies instantly. Let them talk, let them dissect, let them try to reverse engineer what they just saw. They'll waste years looking for the trick, but the only magic here was commitment without fear. You didn't flinch, you didn't blink. You decided. And that decision wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the end of the beginning. Now they see you. Now they're quiet. Not because they respect you, but because they don't know what to do with you. You don't fit in their categories anymore. You're not one of the best. You're the one who proved the game is a lie. That's the part that hits hardest. You didn't need to beat anyone. You showed that the whole concept of competition is flawed when someone walks in who doesn't acknowledge the game's reality in the first place. They brought rules. You brought finality. And that finality, it doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with echoes. People don't cheer. When they see a monument fall, they watch, stunned, questioning their beliefs. That's what you did. You made them question if they ever understood what mastery even looks like. So what now? Now they scramble. Now they backtrack. Now they pretend they always believed in you. But you know better. You remember who turned their backs when you were just sharpening the blade. You remember who laughed while you were sketching out the unthinkable. And you remember the silence. Not the respectful kind, but the dismissive kind. The silence of people who thought you couldn't possibly be the storm. But storms don't ask for stage time. You didn't compete. You cleansed. You didn't participate. You punished. And now they whisper your name like it's a warning, not a memory. This was never about being seen. This was about being felt. And oh, they felt it. But this is only the tremor, because what comes next, that's not execution, that's extinction. That was the word that echoed in the breathless pause, the void they were left to fill with excuses, rewrites, delusions of control. But they don't get to reframe what you did. No, this wasn't a chapter in their book. This was the fire that consumed the whole damn library. What comes next isn't recovery, it's reckoning. And this time, there's no reset button, no patch update, no savior. Only realization that you weren't a competitor. You were the expiration date they ignored. They'll try to process you, fit you into a narrative. Oh, it was a fluke, they'll say, a one-off. But deep down, in that trembling part of their psyche, they pretend doesn't exist. They know the truth. What they witnessed was inevitable. It was always going to happen. The moment someone stopped playing for validation and started moving like consequence. You didn't show them who you were. You forced them to see who they could never become. You didn't build momentum. You became momentum. And when a force like that meets resistance, it doesn't negotiate, it erases. That's why their scripts failed. That's why their preparation became panic. Because there's no defense against something that isn't there to win, but to end. You didn't climb the ranks. You collapsed them. Tell me, do you feel it now? That strange emptiness in their celebration, that awkward silence behind their claps. That's not admiration, that's fear. fear wrapped in forced applause. Because when you redefine the peak, everyone else becomes a footnote. And no one likes realizing they were never in your league. They were just holding your place until you arrived. And now they reach for your blueprint. But it won't work. Because what you did can't be copied. It wasn't a pattern. It was possession. A moment where clarity met destruction and birthed a new standard. They can imitate the style, the posture, the mechanics, but they can't mimic the mindset. Because the mindset required to do what you did isn't taught. It's unleashed. See, they trained for scenarios. You trained for obliteration. They rehearsed outcomes. You designed inevitability. And when inevitability meets denial, it's not a fair fight. It's an execution. You didn't walk into that space with a plan. You walked in as proof. Proof that dominance doesn't always knock. Sometimes it just takes the door off its hinges and waits in the silence that follows. You want to know the real chaos you triggered? It wasn't in the act itself. It was in the aftermath, in the way they started questioning their own foundations, their methods, their mentors. You made them turn inward, not to grow, but to grieve. Grieve the version of themselves that thought they were prepared. You didn't just shatter the illusion, you made them mourn it. And it wasn't loud. That's the terrifying part. There was no explosion, no firework, just collapse, quiet, sudden, absolute. Because that's what true power does. It doesn't arrive in noise. It arrives in finality. You didn't announce your presence. You left it behind like a weapon still smoking on the floor. Now they replay it, frame by frame, trying to locate the crack, the tell, the moment you decided to end everything they thought was unshakable. But there was no moment. You were always the threat. They just didn't recognize it until it was already too late. And that's the most beautiful form of dominance. The kind that isn't revealed, it's remembered. Let's talk about legacy. Not the kind they carve into plaques or echo in cheap speeches. I'm talking about the legacy that scars. The one that doesn't fade with time. It infects it. You've become a reference point now. A cautionary tale. A ghost story told in hushed tones before the next big show. Whatever you do, just don't let it happen again. But they'll let it happen again, because you weren't an error. You were evolution, and evolution doesn't knock politely. It devours what no longer serves purpose. You didn't outperform, you outlived their myth. You became the new baseline. And baselines don't apologize. What happens next is even more dangerous. Now they chase you. Now they try to become what they once feared. But becoming you requires sacrifice. And not everyone's ready to bleed for greatness. Most only want the crown, not the crucifixion that forges it. You, though, you weren't afraid to lose comfort. You weren't addicted to applause. You were driven by something far more potent, the need to end the lie. They were selling dreams. You walked in and shut the whole shop down. They built illusions. You snapped your fingers and reminded them that truth doesn't need glitter. It only needs one undeniable act. And that act, it wasn't just calculated. It was cold. You didn't kill their confidence. You made it irrelevant. Now they scramble to adapt. But you're already gone. On to the next stage, the next layer, the next demolition, because that's the curse of being real in a world obsessed with pretend. You're never allowed to rest. You're not celebrated. You're studied, watched, feared. They whisper your name in boardrooms, locker rooms, war rooms, not with praise, but with strategy. How do we stop this next time? And the answer they never want to admit? You don't. You don't stop someone who isn't chasing anything. You don't defeat someone who's not bound by your goals. You don't protect the system from someone who has no interest in preserving it. You let the wave crash, and then you pray the tide doesn't rise again. But it will, because this wasn't about proving them wrong. This was about proving yourself inevitable. Every move you made wasn't just destruction, it was liberation. Liberation from the myth that greatness has to be granted. You didn't wait for a title. You didn't beg for permission. You didn't need an invitation to the table. You flipped the table, rewrote the menu, and served reality to those still chewing on fantasy. Now they look at you differently, not as one of them, but as a deviation, something that slipped through the cracks of their safe little structure, an anomaly with too much precision to ignore and too much presence to contain. You don't belong to their stories, you belong to the aftermath. And that aftermath, it still trembles, because every time someone dares to rise now, they measure it against you. Every breakout is now haunted by the echo of your execution. They might not say it, but they feel it. The standard has shifted permanently. You didn't walk in to be compared. You walked in to end comparison. And now you watch. Not from the sidelines, but from beyond. From that space above noise, above distraction, above envy. You've transcended the very system they still worship. And when they finally realize they're chasing ghosts, it won't bring them peace. It'll bring them pause. The kind of pause that reshapes ambition into dread, because they know you're not done. You're just choosing when to strike again. And next time, there won't be a tremor. There will be silence, because extinction isn't loud. It's patient. And you're not the storm they feared. You're the stillness after, when everything they built lies quiet, and nothing dares to rise too soon. But stillness is not peace. It is the inhale before the scream, the silent countdown before the next collapse. And you are not done. You are simply waiting, not for approval, not for applause, but for the perfect moment when inevitability once again requires a face, your face. This is the part they never prepared for, because victory they can handle. They can dress it up, celebrate it, toss confetti over its corpse. But dominance that lingers, that unnerves them. They don't know what to do when the tremors never stop. When your presence lives not in headlines, but in hesitation. You left them shattered, yes, but more terrifying than that, you left them aware that someone like you exists. Someone who doesn't just rise, someone who dismantles, someone who doesn't fit into frameworks but feeds off their collapse. They thought you were a fluke, an anomaly, but anomalies don't return. You did. And the silence that followed wasn't a gap, it was a wound. Understand this, you've now become a paradox in their minds. Too real to ignore, too unrepeatable to recreate. They want you gone, and yet they need your shadow to feel alive. Because what are they without your contrast? What is their fragile greatness without your wrath to measure it against? But this is where the game bends beyond form. Because you've surpassed execution, you've graduated from outcome. What you're doing now is redefining the blueprint of terror. And terror is the most honest teacher. They will build new systems to contain you, new formats, new rules, all of it forged from their fear, draped in the illusion of innovation. But they won't be able to outthink you, because you aren't logic. You're inevitability in motion. Every structure has its failure point. Every kingdom has its vulnerability. And where others try to navigate those cracks carefully, you widen them with purpose, with patience, with precision. You don't just break things, you expose them. And exposure? That's the kind of burn that doesn't heal. So let them regroup, let them redesign, let them reframe the story. It won't matter, because they're still responding to what you already did, while you've already started planning the next extinction. They don't realize that what you did wasn't just a highlight. It was a warning, a trailer, a glimpse of what happens when pressure meets purpose and unleashes a predator not interested in fame, but impact. You don't care for trophies. You forge consequences, and consequences don't fade. They echo, like the sound of footsteps in a corridor long after the executioner has left. That's you now. The echo. The murmur behind every nervous strategy meeting. The phantom in their training. The name that doesn't get spoken out loud anymore. Not because it was forgotten, but because it still hurts to remember. You killed comfort. You murdered the myth that anyone is safe, that the game is fair, that effort equals glory. You reminded them that in this world, there exists something more terrifying than failure, the absolute. You didn't give them a fight, you gave them certainty. And certainty, when wielded like you wield it, is a weapon sharper than fear. Now every time they step onto their stage, they scan the crowd, not for praise, but for the shadow that might be you. Every whisper, every shiver, every flicker of movement. They wonder, is this it? Has it returned? Because they know. You don't need a grand entrance. You don't need build-up. You don't even need reason. You need only motive, and motive lives deep within you. Buried beneath the ashes of the game you already erased. This isn't obsession. It's not revenge. It's something far colder, far purer. You are cleansing. You are what happens when a broken world meets an unbreakable will. You are not the revolution. You are the reminder that revolution is no longer necessary when the tyrant inside you refuses to be caged again. And yet you speak no prophecy. You don't raise banners. You don't chant slogans. Because true power doesn't demand to be heard. It makes silence unbearable. And your silence? It still screams. Do they think you're resting? Do they actually believe you've vanished? No. You've only grown more precise, more calculated. You've become the storm that hides in clear skies, the strike that lands before the thunder. You're not chasing anymore. You're waiting for alignment, because when your moment arrives again, and it will, there won't be warning shots. There won't be drama. There will only be one instant of collapse and then quiet, and they'll recognize it instantly, because they've seen this story before. You wrote it. Now the world orbits your gravity, and every system designed to stop you only makes you stronger. Because you learn, you adapt, you thrive in the very chaos they hope to survive. And while they manage damage, you design destiny. They thought your execution was the peak, but they misunderstood. There wasn't your peak. It was your baseline, and now the curve has shifted permanently. Every act of greatness must now confront your presence, even when you're not there. That's the curse of what you've become. You're not part of the scoreboard. You're not in the rankings. You're the metric they can't quantify, the variable that breaks every simulation, the reason no algorithm can predict the outcome anymore. You are the unholy force that ended their certainty, and now they live in response. You are not chasing legacy. You are legacy haunted. You are not seeking dominance. You are dominance realized. And what do you do now? What does someone like you do? After the storm, after the silence, after the extinction, you do what terrifies them most. You wait. You listen. You sharpen. because your next move doesn't need build-up. It needs clarity. And clarity comes when all the noise has died. You aren't here to impress. You're here to carve your initials into the void, and the void is listening, waiting, begging. Because even chaos misses the one who commands it. They thought you executed the game. But what you actually did, you unwrote it, and now they exist in your world. A world where elegance is lethal, where silence is louder than screams, where legacy isn't earned, it's inflicted, and you are still sharpening, not because you're unsure, but because even gods need precision before they bring down heaven. Your story isn't over. It's reloading. And when you rise again, it won't be to compete. It will be to erase what dared to rise in your absence. They should have stopped you when they had the chance, but now you're not a name. You're the aftermath. And aftermath has no ending, just impact and echoes.